Chapter 6. Thursday morning, Nick sat at his desk, skimming through the pages from the list of black Nissans in Callahan. It was a long, mind-numbing process, but he knew the importance of getting the job done. The phone rang. Reaching over, Nick grabbed up the handset.
Yes, Mara.
He paused. Sheriff Moran, there's a situation between Deputy Fisk and Trinny Gus that needs your attention.
What kind of situation?
Nick was almost afraid to ask. Deputy Fisk arrested Trinny Gus. He and Mrs. Gus are in the Deputy Fisk's office.
Tell them I'll be right there,
Nick said, hanging up. Pushing himself away from the desk, Nick barged out of his office. This wasn't the way to start the morning. Nick went down the hall and into Fisk's office. There he saw Deputy Fisk pecking about the keys of his computer, no doubt typing his report.
There's the sheriff.
Trinny grabbed Ida's arm. Sheriff Moran, you've got to help us. Ida cried, rising to her feet. The purse in her hand fell to the floor. Oh, Ida gasped, motioning to bend down. However, Nick reached for the purse and handed it back to the elderly woman. Thank you, Sheriff.
That's all right,
Nick said with a nod. He turned to Trinny, who sat in the chair beside Ida with his hands bound in handcuffs.
What happened here?
Nick asked, pulling up a chair. Fisk paused in his typing with an impatient sigh. Trinny started having one of those episodes again. He started yelling and screaming right in the middle of Hal's grocery store. Ida began.
When I got there, the whole store was in an uproar.
Fisk cut in, but Nick sent a stern warning Fisk's way, discouraging him from saying another word.
Did Hal file a complaint?
Nick asked, directing his question to Ida, who seemed the calmest of the three. No, Sheriff. Ida answered with a nervous shake of her head.
Were there any damages done to Hal's store?
Trinny didn't throw or break anything, if that's what you mean.
Will you excuse me for a moment?
Nick asked, getting up and walking over to Fisk's desk. He leaned down to Fisk's ear.
What exactly are you typing? My report on the incident at the store.
Fisk said, his face tight with fear.
Are you planning to file your report with the prosecuting attorney's office? Unless you have a problem with it. Here's a problem I have,
Nick said in a disturbingly calm tone.
Trinny Gus is an 81-year-old Vietnam War veteran. He has post-traumatic stress disorder. If Hal wants to file a complaint, he can do that. But that complaint will have to go before the prosecuting attorney's office. At that point, Judge Strader will decide if Mr. Gus needs to be brought in. Since none of that happened, you have 2 minutes to get those handcuffs off of Mr. Gus with an apology and see to it that he and his wife get home safely. And the next time you want to arrest somebody, you better make sure it's by the book or you're done here. Is that understood? Loud and clear, sir.
Fisk said, deleting his report. He got up and walked around the desk where he carefully unfastened the cuffs around Trinny's wrist.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Trinny sighed. Ida reached up and wrapped her arms around Nick's shoulders, giving him a hug. Your deputy said that Trinny could make one phone call, so he called you. Trinny said that the sheriff would know what to do. I knew he was right. Ida went on.
It's okay. If you ever need me, just give me a call.
Thank you, Sheriff, Ida said, giving him another hug, followed by Trinny.
Excuse me.
Fisk said, clearing his throat, getting their attention. Ida, Trinny, and Nick turned to him.
I just wanted to apologize for the arrest. I was out of line, and I'm very sorry. If you and Mr. Gus are ready, I will take you back to the store so you can get your car.
Thank you, young man, Ida said, followed by a smile that was more forgiving than Nick would have had under the same circumstances. Fisk picked up his radio and left. Sheriff Moran, Ida said, turning back to Nick. Trinny and I overheard the cashier talking to Hal about one of those bills you mentioned at the town meeting the other night.
What are you saying?
They said something about a bill being counterfeit. That's the reason Deputy Fisk was there. He was talking to the cashier about it. I guess it was the stress of the commotion that caused Trinny to have a fit. That's when your deputy clamped the cuffs on Trinny and hauled us both down here.
I'm very sorry that happened.
I know that. You've got a good heart, which is more than I can say for your deputy. Why, he's been stirring up trouble all over Callahan. He's worse than those counterfeiters, I suppose. He laughed.
I'll talk to him,
Nick promised. By the time Nick returned to his office, Michellin was sitting at the desk across from his. Her tightly bound bun and crisp navy blue suit was quite the opposite from the way she looked the evening before.
Good morning,
Nick said, walking over to his desk. Good morning, Sheriff, Michellin said coolly. Nick chuckled, knowing that she was paying him back for yesterday.
I'm here to use the computer, but I can't stay. I think there's been a break in the case. I've got to go check it out.
Where are you going? Michellin looked up from her work.
Hal's grocery store. I was told someone may have tried to pass a counterfeit bill there today.
Do you mind if I tag along? she asked, quickly pushing her aggravation aside.
We can take my car,
Nick said, grabbing his keys and his radio as they rushed out. It was a little after 11 o'clock when Nick pulled into the parking lot of Hal's Market. From the look of it, no one was there. That was pretty odd, on account that this time of day the parking lot was usually full. Do you think they closed and just forgot to turn the sign over?
Let's go find out.
Nick said, getting out. Michellin followed Nick into the store. Inside, a few employees were busy organizing shelves of food that were already organized.
Sheriff Moran.
A middle-aged man with a slight receding hairline hurried over to greet them.
Good morning, Hal,
Nick said as Michellin continued to look around.
Deputy Fisk didn't tell me you were coming.
Hal continued. His eyes shifted to Michellin. Remembering her from the town meeting, he nodded hello.
Hello, Mr. Dietrich,
Michellin said.
You're here about the counterfeit bills, right?
Hal asked Nick.
Bills? You mean there were more than one? There were 3 of them. I thought your deputy would have told you. The morning's been busy. Yes, I understand. Is there somewhere we can talk in private? Sure, come on back to my office.
Hal said, leading Nick and Michellin through the double doors labeled personnel only. Down the hall, just from the loading dock, sat Hal's office.
Please, have a seat,
Hal said, closing the door.
Thank you.
Michellin and Nick said practically in unison, claiming the chairs in front of Hal's desk.
Let me start by saying that Sarah Garvey is new on the cash register. This is only her 2nd week. Anyway, by the time she realized what had happened, the customer was long gone. Where is she now?
Nick asked.
I sent her home. Matter of fact, I'm closing up shop for the rest of the afternoon.
Is that really necessary?
I need to shut this down for a while. I can't have those bills coming through here and I don't know about them. It's possible that the customer didn't even know that the bills were counterfeit to begin with. This is a mess.
Nick sighed heavily. Mr. Dietrich, I notice your cameras. Do you have a surveillance system?
Yeah, I got it installed a while back. Unfortunately, it's not working. I've been meaning to have the repair guy come out and take a look at it.
Hal said, clearing his throat, making himself comfortable in his chair. Nick couldn't help but notice the skeptical look on Michelin's face.
Can you tell us what denominations the bills were?
Nick asked.
They were 20s. Kathy, my senior cashier, was taking over the cash register so Sarah could take her break. That's when she said the serial numbers for 3 of the bills contained 9 numbers instead of 8, like what you said.
He turned to Michellin.
I'm assuming you gave them to Deputy Fisk? I was about to before he went after Trinny with the cuffs. So they're still here? They're right here. I was planning on bringing them to your office once I locked up things here.
Hal said, opening his desk drawer and handing the bills to Nick. Michellin quickly moved in for a closer look. May I? She asked, pulling a pair of plastic gloves and a neatly folded plastic bag from the pocket of her suit jacket. After putting on her gloves, she took the bills and studied each one. You're right, they're counterfeit, she said finally.
You're not going to hold me responsible for this, are you?
Hal asked. No, of course not, Michellin assured him. But I will have to conduct a test to see who's handled them, she added, dropping the bills into the plastic bag.
How soon will you know something?
Hal asked. It's a fairly simple process. It shouldn't take long.
If you think of anything else, give me a call. Sure thing, Sheriff. Thank you for your time. We'll see ourselves out,
Nick said as they left. Nick and Michellin walked out to the parking lot.
When Hal said that his surveillance system was down, you looked like you didn't believe him.
I don't know. He seemed like he was hiding something, Michellin said, getting into the car.
Maybe he was,
Nick said simply.
That test you mentioned, how would you go about doing that?
I have a test kit back at the motel where I'm staying. I can run a test and then we can go back to the station. It shouldn't take long.
Fine, let's go,
Nick said. It wasn't until the 3 words tumbled out of Nick's mouth that he realized what he had agreed to. I'm staying at the Gribble Motel on Route 9.
I know where it is,
Nick said, wishing that they would have taken separate cars. Was Michellin as bothered by the idea as he was? Nick wondered, glancing over at Michellin from the corner of his eye. Judging by the carefree look on her face, the idea of them being alone together in her private quarters wasn't as big a deal for her as it was for him. The truth was, ever since Susan walked out on him, Nick hadn't the heart to meet anyone new. It wasn't a decision he came to overnight. It was more of a gradual process of putting himself out there and regretting it shortly after. What a fool he had been to keep handing his heart over to women who wanted nothing more than to drop-kick it across the street. He was better off without it. Nick, he heard as he turned to Michellin.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
If this is uncomfortable for you, you can drop me off at my motel and I'll just take a cab back to the station when I'm done.
No, it's not a problem at all.
he said, trying to sound convincing as he pulled into the parking lot of the Grable. Michellin fumbled around in her purse for her keys. Getting out of the car, Nick followed Michellin up to her door on the second floor. He said nothing as she unlocked the door, and they went inside. The sun shone through the thin openings of blinds, leaving the room dimly lit. Michellin turned on the lights. Despite the fact that her room was impeccably neat, Nick refused to let on that her ability to maintain order was impressive. "Let's get started," Michellin said, taking out a 12 by 12-inch case from the closet. Pushing the tab, she lifted the flap and opened it into some sort of chemistry lab. Nick watched as she plugged in the cord and pushed the button, turning on the contraption. Michellin put on another pair of plastic gloves. After sprinkling some sort of powder on the bills, she took an adhesive strip and placed it on top of the powder. Nick's eyes shifted from the focus on her face to the adhesive she slowly pulled from the bill. Lastly, she placed the adhesive on a dark board and slid the board into the scanner of the machine. Within minutes, a fingerprint appeared on the screen. "Now we'll run a search. Hopefully we'll get a match," Michellin said, pressing enter. "If the print doesn't belong to a person with a past offense, we're back at square one." For all of her specialized government gadgets, Nick hoped she would have given him a more definitive response. "Wait a minute, we're getting something."
What is it?
Nick moved closer. "It's reading 6 separate prints." Michellin typed in the appropriate information. She pressed enter again. "We have a match."
Who is it?
"Howard Keeley, age 27, Michellin said, reading off the other stats from his criminal record underneath his mugshot. "It says that he's just been released from serving 10 years at Kirk Correctional Facility in upstate New York."
Does it say what he was in for?
"Possession of an illegal substance. Are we assuming just because his print is on this bill that he's linked to this case?"
Since he's the only one with a record, I definitely think he should be considered. And I'd like to know what kind of car he drives.
"You think he's the driver of the black Nissan or the red Honda?"
Either way, we're finally getting somewhere.
"We?" She smiled brightly.
"Yeah, you've done some good work."
"So have you, Sheriff," Michellin said with a clever smile. It was obvious that she was making fun of him now, but even Nick couldn't suppress a little smile, trying to appear. A light-hearted giggle bubbled up from Michelin's throat, causing her to hide her face from embarrassment. It was a side of her that Nick hadn't seen before. It did funny things to his heart. Nick cleared his throat, fighting to find something to say that could change the subject, but at the moment, she was the only thing he could think about. What was the matter with him? He had more important things to focus on than the alluring features of her face. Nick chuckled lightly as he went over to the window where he stood with his back facing her. "Are you going to bring him in for questioning?" Michellin asked. Nick turned around just as she pulled the clasp from her hair, allowing the long auburn strands to fall gracefully about her shoulders. What was she doing, he thought, waiting to see what she was going to do next. Michellin reached up and ran her fingers through her hair. Then, without any warning, she stepped out of her shoes and padded barefoot across the carpeted floor, obviously unaware of what she was doing to him.
"Would you like me to step out so you can get dressed or something?"
Nick asked. "Oh, I'm sorry, I was just slipping into some comfortable shoes."
"I'm just used to seeing you with your hair up. Well, there was last night."
"I came over yesterday evening." She corrected him.
"Yes, that's what I meant."
He nervously stumbled. Now he had done it. Was it wishfully thinking on his part to see her at his house last night? Nick's face reddened with embarrassment.
"If we're finished here, I need to head back to the office."
"You didn't answer my question."
"I think your hair is great,"
Nick said. She blushed. "Thank you, but I was referring to whether or not you're going to bring Howard Keeley in for questioning."
"Who?"
Nick frowned. "The man with the fingerprints on the bill," Michellin said, fighting to hold back her laughter.
"Yes."
Nick chuckled lightly.
"I'll bring him in. If you don't mind, I'm going to go wait in the car."
"That's fine." Nick turned and left without another word. Down the steps he went as he continued to go over in his mind the fool he had made of himself. He had given Michellin plenty of reasons to think he was a simple-minded country sheriff, the way he went on rambling about her hair in the middle of their investigation. Sure, he tried to put up a good front, that he knew what he was doing. But after his moment of careless words, she knew that the case was the farthest thing from his mind. During his rambling fit, Nick suggested that he wait for her in the car without even knowing how long she was going to be. If Michellin was anything like Susan, she would probably come down wearing a completely different outfit. Nick was starting to wish that he would have stayed up in the room with her. Any other man would have encouraged the situation with the beautiful woman practically undressing in front of him. What must he'd been thinking, putting himself in a position where he'd be sitting alone in the car? Hearing the door close, Nick looked up and saw Michellin locking her door. Just as he had figured, she was dressed completely different. From what he could tell, leaning forward, straining his eyes to see, she was wearing a white sleeveless blouse and a pair of navy blue slacks that fit the sleek curvature of her body with every step she took. Nick swallowed hard as she came down the steps and approached the car. Once she got in, her flowery perfume drifted up his nostrils, practically choking him up. Nick coughed, getting more and more annoyed by her presence. There was getting to be too much of her. She was everywhere he looked, her scent, her hair, her feet, and now, judging from the corner of his eye, the slenderness of her shoulder. Did she ever eat? In the 2 times he and Michellin had eaten together, she barely finished anything. He figured she was probably the type who consumed nothing but vegetables and protein shakes and worked out excessively at the gym, keeping perfectly toned from head to toe. According to the unexpected barefoot trip she took to the closet, he was right. "It's really hot this time of year," Michellin complained with a brisk wave of her hand.
"Yeah, today's a real scorcher,"
Nick said, adjusting the setting on the air conditioner, hoping his patrol car could crank out a little more air. "I thought we'd get a little rain last night."
"Does it rain a lot where you're from?"
he asked, pulling to a stop behind a Chevy at the intersection. "We get about 43 inches a year. In weather terms, that's about average, considering Hawaii gets around 64.
"You know a lot of facts. I bet that comes in handy working for the government."
"You must think we're all a bunch of stodgy robotic pain in the necks, don't you?"
"Isn't that kind of the requirement?"
"Very funny, Nick. But what about you? Was it always your dream to be a sheriff?"
"It all just kind of happened, really. I was at a town meeting one evening. One word led to another, and before you know it, I was being nominated to run for sheriff."
"But you didn't decline."
"No, I didn't. I was young and full of ideas. I guess I thought I could make a difference."
"It's a good town, for the most part. I think people feel safe. At least I have since I've been here," she said softly.
"I'm glad to hear it."
He smiled.
"You said you're originally from Lowell? That's about as small as Callahan. Is that why you left?"
Nick asked, finally pulling into his spot in front of the sheriff's department. Michellin looked up at him. She noticed that he was patiently waiting for her answer. "I don't know. I thought that I could do more in D.C.
"Do you get to visit Lowell often?"
"Not as often as I should, I'm afraid."
"I guess what I'm really wondering is, would you ever find yourself coming back to Callahan?"
"It would depend on my next assignment."
"Oh, I see,"
Nick said with disappointment. Michellin wasn't sure if she had said something to offend him. Judging by the awkward silence that fell between them, she guessed she had.